And thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar on childcare consumer education website communication strategies. We're really excited that you could join us today. My name is Mel Banks. I'm with the I'm an early childhood consultant with the State Childcare. I am so sorry. I'm with the Childcare State Capacity Building Center, and I'm very, very excited to have some folks joining us today that can speak a little bit better than I can. So let me show you who our panel is today. We've got a really great assembly of folks from ICF Next Government that are going to be sharing some information on how you can use your consumer education website to strengthen communication with stakeholders. And so I will introduce everyone a little bit more and as we move through our presentation today, but I do want to just share who's joining us on the phone. We have Brian Kaufman, Senior Communications Advisor, who will share with us some ideas on how a communications plan can help you to promote your consumer education website. We also have Jeff Gibbons, who is a Media Relations and Crisis Communication Specialist. And Jeff will share some helpful tips on how you might use your consumer education website during an emergency. Next, we'll move to Elizabeth Jessup, who's a social media specialist, and she'll walk through several options for using social media with your communication, your consumer education website. And finally, we're going to have Darren Goldberg, who has the very impressive title of Digital Performance and Optimization Lead. And he's going to offer some insight on how data analytics can be used to strengthen both your website and your communications plan. So that's who we have on the end of the line, our end of the line today. And we'd love to hear a little bit more from you and who's joining us on the other end of the line. So we just want you to share in a poll that I'll pull up next. What is your position or role? So as you can see, we're just asking if you serve as a state government professional, a state level professional, if you're on a communications team or you're a contractor with communications, if you serve as another role. So I'm going to leave this poll up for just a few seconds so folks have a chance to respond. Looks like we have quite a few people. Some folks are still trickling in too. I'll give you a few moments. Looks like we've got a lot of folks from state government that are joining us. And some training and technical assistance folks, and a handful of folks in other or in IT. Feel free to share with us in the chat if you are calling in, or if you know one of the pieces doesn't quite fit you. All right, and then we're going to move on. So as you can see, here's the results of the folks that had a chance to respond. So the majority of you are calling in from state government, but a fair amount from training and technical assistance as well, and a handful of other areas. We're really glad you can join us and hope that you get a lot out of this presentation. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about how we structured the presentation today and what you can expect from today's presentation. So I think we don't really need to belabor the reason that a topic on communication strategies feels relevant today. It's probably not very risky to assume that a lot of you are joining us from your home or a temporary work environment or a location that has greatly reduced staffing or new work protocols. So some of you may be back to operations that looked fairly similar to the day-to-day prior to this current health crisis, but others of you may be operating under a completely new normal. And regardless, many of you likely have been presented with the challenge over the past few months of how to share information with parents and families and providers, policymakers, and many other stakeholders while you're operating under several new and unexpected constraints. So added to that burden, some of you may now have new and immediate needs surrounding natural disasters such as wildfires and hurricanes, tornadoes, and flooding. While you're responding to these incidents in the moment, it can feel overwhelming, and there are some lessons to be learned from previous incidents and from the experts in the field, like the ones that we've gathered today for this panel. So for today's presentation, each expert will spend a little bit of time speaking to their area of expertise regarding communications, both in day-to-day operations and in times of crisis. As our presenters are sharing, please feel free to add your comments and questions in the chat box, and we'll respond to them if time allows. We have a lot to cover today, so we may not be able to get to every question, but we'll do what we can to respond to general themes and to provide opportunities for follow-up after the call. Throughout the presentation, we'll also be sharing resources and links in the chat box. Don't worry about grabbing all of those links from the chat. We will also send out email to everyone who's registered after this presentation that will have those links available. And then finally, I just want to share with you today that the information that's being shared by our experts in this call is intended to be a starting point. It's to inspire quality improvement within your lead agency around using the consumer education website to improve communications. So the suggestions that are offered and may not be immediately available to your agency, and that's okay. It's really important to take incremental steps towards quality improvement in this area. You can start with a simple plan and add more advanced elements as you gain comfort with the topic and build support around this area within your agency. Every small improvement will help your agency better support families connect to quality childcare. And that's really what's important at the end of the day. So with all of that under our belt, I'm going to get started. This is just a short recap of the topics for today that I talked about just in the entry. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of a successful communication plan. We're going to talk about communications during a crisis. We're going to learn how to leverage social media as a communication tool, both during and outside of crisis. And then we're also going to talk about how data analytics can help you optimize your website and your communications plan. All right, so with that, I'm going to more officially introduce Brian Kochman. Brian serves as ICF's Senior Communications Advisor for the National Institutes of Health. His background in health policy and legislative affairs, combined with his more than 20 years of communication expertise, informs his work on national outreach campaigns on topics like cancer, diversity and inclusion, anti-harassment, and infectious diseases. Additionally, Brian has developed childcare consumer education website plans for several of our states receiving intensive technical assistance, and is in the process of helping us develop some universal communication resources that we'll be rolling out soon. We're excited to have his expertise as he shares with you some ideas for developing effective communication plans. They're all yours, Brian.
All right, thanks, Mel. Thanks so much, and welcome, everyone. Let's dive right in. At its core, any strategic communications plan, whether it be for a consumer website, program, or other initiative, it always starts with 4 steps. And these 4 steps include conduct, connect, develop, and create. In the conduct phase, we're talking about formative research, and formative research helps define audiences, how to access these audiences, and describes the attributes of your audiences. It's the very first step to consider when planning, as great research always begets great communications. Formative research often also includes core components like an environmental scan, literature review, interviews, and message testing. These pieces of formative research can also help determine how people perceive childcare in your particular state, as well as reveal key insights on communications best practices. By scanning the environment, your department or division can really determine what organizational websites are currently looked at as the gold standard, which may be you in your state, or for childcare information and licensing. The literature review can examine things like books, scholarly articles, and other sources relevant to childcare communications to provide a foundational knowledge and identify potential gaps in how your website reaches and communicates with your audiences. So part and parcel to the research process is developing research questions as part of the environmental scan. So in other words, what are you trying to find out? Put yourself in the shoes of your audiences and try to determine what they might want to know. Ask yourself, what is the challenge I need to solve or the issue I need to address? You can also find out the answers to these questions through informal or formal interviews. Interviews support the scan and literature review and can take place via email or the phone with internal audiences like department heads or communications leads. If external audiences, participation is preferred, you will want to consult your comm specialist to set these up because there's usually parameters you have to follow to engage the public when you work for a government agency. But this is also a great way to get internal and external buy-in for your messages, themes, and messages. In the connect phase, you will want to determine if your consumer education website promotion plan will have to be tied to any sort of overall larger strategy. So does your Department of Education or Public Instruction have a master strategic plan? Does your department have an overall communications plan or strategic priorities that you might want to pay attention to? Ask yourself these questions and try to map your website promotional goals to an overarching strategy if possible. So this way, when you present your plan, you have a foundation and an evidence base to refer to the powers that be, if you will. It'll set you up for success when discussing this with other communications leads or department heads. In the develop phase, you'll want to consider the findings from the research phase, including the interviews and all of the strategic priorities or goals from your department's overall plan if they have one. If your department doesn't have an overall plan, look to the state overarching strategic plan, as there should be one of those. You may be able to also borrow language from this to support the development of a message bank. And I'll get into the ins and outs of a message bank in a moment. But a message bank essentially is a quick reference document that helps you outline central points, main points, and takeaway points for your particular communications initiative. So in this case, your promotional plan for your website. Message banks should always be written in plain language, which I'll also explain. You can probably guess, though, that plain language is just what it is. It's plain language. It's often written at an 8th grade level and does not use jargony, quote unquote, language specific to your industry. So closely related to the development, or to the develop phase rather, is the last phase, which is create. Taking all of the knowledge that you have from the first 3 phases, you'll develop a strategic communications plan for your website with actionable, measurable strategies and tactics. I'll get into the components of a strategic communications plan in just a few moments, but the plan is your roadmap on how you'll achieve goals and objectives, and is the way to speak the same language of your comms counterparts or department heads who want to see how this supports the overall goals and strategies or vision of your department. So what is plain language? So expanding on this a little bit, it simply means you reach audiences with writing that resonates with them, and it's not technical. They should understand what you're trying to say the first time they read it. Plain language on your website, it just means that people can find what they understand what they find, and then use what they find to meet their needs. Understand it. And so this is not what we want to happen. We want it to be able to understand the first time we go through and read it. I've listed some resources here that I use in the public health world, but they can be used in any industry that wants to communicate with audiences in a straightforward way. Plainlanguage.gov is a really great resource and has a lot of examples, so you'll want to check that out. You'll also want to remember that language that is plain to one set of readers may not be plain to others. So again, considering who your audiences is and kind of what messages might resonate with them. And again, I'll get into messaging a little later into the presentation. You should use people first language, and people first language identifies the individual before the situation they may be facing. And again, I'll provide an example later in the presentation about this. But when you use first people language, or people first language rather, you do not define a person by his or her circumstances. For instance, you would want to use the phrase resources for children with special needs rather than special needs resources. Also keep in mind that Spanish language translation really needs to be called Spanish language adaptation. There are more than 24 countries around the world that speak Spanish, for example, and each has their own words and cultures, as you might know. Spanish translation and adaptation are not a one-size-all-fits-type thing. So again, this is another 4-step checklist, it will be. This is the first slide of 2. That is a simple way to determine if you're using plain language as you craft your communications plan, messaging, and ultimately content for your website. So you'll want to use active verbs. You'll want to include familiar phrases like I have here on the screen. You also want to use simple but descriptive words. This is a good example. Instead of using mandate use of developmentally appropriate activities to support early learning, you could say make sure program activities help children learn and grow. Again, you can see the vast difference in both those. You'll also want to use repeatable sayings. And remember that using plain language that less isn't always more. Yes, succinct messaging is preferred, but only if you don't lose meaning of what you're trying to say. So translating jargon into plain language sometimes can result in longer phrases or sentences, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You'll kind of want to think of brevity as how quickly your audience can process what you're saying, not just how many words you're using to express it. So we'll want to use words wisely too. And what I mean by this is you can use plain language to your advantage by choosing your words to create an emotional reaction. So remember, the ultimate goal of your website content is to translate those no, quote unquote, and do. But again, basically kind of talking about plain language and using that to your advantage to create emotional reaction. So remember, the ultimate goal of your website content is to translate those know and do messages into action. So in other words, what do you want people to know and do after they read the content on your website? What's the call to action and what's the action you want them to take? You'll also want to use language that generates mental images. So think about how your parents or grandparents, for example, would tell stories and how this kind of always conjure up a mental image in your mind. Remember to use memorable and familiar phrases. So in other words, don't use jargony language. Repetition of main messages will also help people become familiar with your website and your website content, as well as your online identity. All right, so let's talk about the message bank framework. Earlier I mentioned this, and so I'd like to now show you a really very simple way to organize messages after you've done your formative research. Remember that the environmental scan, literature review, and interview should be viewed holistically in order to parse out key messages. In this example, the central point describes an overarching theme or may describe a challenge that you're facing or that your industry is facing. Main points answer the question of so what, and takeaway points describe the education challenge in more detail using statistics or other supporting information. Remember that messaging should succinctly answer what your particular department or division wants target audiences to know and do after reading content from your website. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have the budget, external messaging testing is always the best, but if you have a trusted network of partners, whether they be external, internal, or communications colleagues, you can also test informally this way. Developing a message bank, I would also add, is not just for websites. It can be used to help you develop speeches and talking points, fact sheets, and other written communications as well. So I'll give the caveat with this slide. I don't expect you to read this. The print is very small, but I did want to provide two examples, real-world examples, that I've developed in the course of my work for the National Library of Medicine. Here we see that the core or central message is the overarching theme. And in this case, it explains what the NLM, or the National Library of Medicine, is and how it's the world's largest biomedical library. The main point or key message of So What is how the National Library of Medicine's research and information services advance biomedicine to support scientific discovery in healthcare. And then finally, the supporting or takeaway points support the main points with statistics or real-world examples. So in this case, one of the supporting points reads, each day more than 6 million people use the NLM website and download 115 terabytes of data. So again, I'd also like to note that this is a living document born out of research. So you should put your messages through a plain language lens specific to your industry once this has been developed. The message bank is a guide. So I always tell people that it's, your messages are not set in stone. So, because I know as communications folks, we sometimes get scared when we receive a document that's the messages are there and we feel like it's set in stone, like I said. But again, this is just a guide and a quick reference to see how your organization is talking about something or wants to talk about something. It is not meant to replace a strategic priority, how you talk about your programs. But again, it guides you on what to talk about by knowing what's going on around you in the childcare or education space. So here's another example, and it's the same example that you just saw on the previous slide, but this example is in formatted in an Excel spreadsheet. And here we go one step further. Again, it's for the National Library of Medicine, but we go one step further. NLM's 3 main strategic goals, and the X below there to know what messages correspond to what strategic priorities. So again, if you can attach your communications and messaging to an overall strategy or an overarching strategy, and it can explain this to your colleagues, department heads, or division leads, your job becomes much easier when it comes to website promotions and communications because you're kind of speaking their language, right? All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the components of a strategic communications plan. Once we've done the research, connected our strategy to our department or division's strategic priorities, and develop a solid messaging bank, we can move on to the development of a strategic communications plan to promote your website. So the background section of your plan really sets the stage and outlines what you want to accomplish. Imagine if someone was reading your plan for the first time, they'd need some sort of context on why you're developing the plan in the first place. For example, your background section might say something like early childhood care and learning programs combined with support from parents, caregivers, teachers, and other audiences help children to develop a full range of skills. Again, that's just kind of boilerplate language that I've developed in some of the plans that I've written. But again, you can expand off of that. But again, the background really does kind of set the stage. Also, I'd recommend setting no more than 3 goals and 3 objectives for each one of those goals that you create. If you have more than that, it kind of gets to be unwieldy and you can lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish. Objectives should also be SMART, and SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So when an objective is specific, it is clearly stated, so anyone reading it can understand what will be done and who will do it. When an objective is measurable, it includes how the action will be measured. Measuring your objectives helps you determine if you're making progress, and it also keeps you on track and on schedule. And again, metrics are really important, again, when you're trying to show success to the powers that be. When an objective is achievable, it's realistic given the realities faced by your organization. So setting reasonable objectives helps set the project up for success. When the objective is relevant, it makes sense. So in other words, it fits the purpose of your promotions and overall strategy. It fits the culture and structure of your organization, and it addresses the vision of the project. And then finally, when an objective is time-bound, it means that every objective has a specific timeline for completion. There are numerous SMART resources and templates online that explain this in more detail. So a simple Google search will turn this up if you're interested in more information. I know that Mel is going to provide some resources at the end as well. So now moving on to target audiences. Target audiences for your promotions will more than likely include, obviously, families and caregivers. But this might be segmented out even further. And so I guess I should pause here and say that, Mel mentioned in the beginning that we're developing a template of sorts for the communications plan. And so we'll have some of this information in here, but quickly, I just kind of want to run through kind of top line audiences that could be parents or primary caregivers or children ages 0 to 8 years old, friends, families, neighbors, or other caregivers, tribal communities and people with Native American heritage, Hispanic and Latino people who are bilingual or speak only Spanish, if you live in a state where Hispanic and Latino population is high. And then when we talk about child care professionals, it could be child care centers, family child care homes, preschools, resident camps. As experts in this field, you probably know all of your audiences, but again, sometimes having them listed out and seeing them on paper, you may think of other things. So I think it's very important to list these out, and it's an integral part of any sort of communications plan. So key messages we've already talked about and should also be part of your plan. So everything is in one place, and any sort of reader can connect. And when I say reader, it will more than likely be internal folk, can connect the dots from strategies to tactics, which I'll table until the next slide because the strategies and tactics is a larger discussion. So let's skip that one for now and then move on to timeline. But as I said earlier, your goals and objectives, they must be time-bound. So setting a clear milestone and specific goals timeline from the onset will save you a lot of trouble as you progress through implementation of your plan. And then finally, there's evaluation, which can be either qualitative or quantitative. You should always set clear metrics from the onset to determine what success looks like for you. Is it the number of visitors to your website? How long do they stay on your website? Do they download items from your website? And then from a qualitative perspective, what do people say about your website, both internally and externally? What sort of feedback are you getting from your informal or partner networks? Are you even asking them for feedback? My colleague Darren will speak a little bit more to analytics in a moment for more information on this, so just stand by. I should also mention at this juncture again that, we're working on that template. So anything that I'm saying here about the communications plan, it'll be in a template, and Mel can tell you how to access that whenever we've completed that. So going back to sample strategies and tactics, I'd like to talk about the ones that are most helpful when considering website promotion, But I'd also make the note that crisis communications and social media are vitally important. My colleagues Jeff and Elizabeth will talk about these two components in detail a bit later in the presentation, so stay tuned. So targeted outreach means reaching audiences that can help amplify your messages. They could be PTAs, education stakeholders, existing partners, or informal networks. The list goes on and on. The key is how to engage them so they can help you with resource promotion or even development or testing of materials and messages. Paid social media campaigns, which Elizabeth will briefly discuss in a moment, are a great way to promote your website and are relatively inexpensive. I always give the example of a federal client that I work with who has a multi-billion-dollar budget. We did a $20,000 paid social media campaign that was very effective. And so I only mention this to say, I know budgets are not that big. Sometimes I will at the state level, but I only mention this to say that small budgets can be effective. And again, Elizabeth will go through this in just a minute. Additionally, partnerships and stakeholders can help give more legs to your website promotions and extend kind of the reach. That's what I mean by legs, or promotions in general, really, for that matter. So it can offer your department or division additional communications channels, events, speaking opportunities, and media hooks. I will note here that a separate partnership strategy and plan may be needed, but for our purposes today and for the template that we're building out, I'm speaking to partnerships as part of the strategic communications plan. Okay, so by maximizing partnerships, your department can also maximize how it helps your department target audiences and learn more about the motivations of parents and child care providers. I'd also like to mention here that private and public collaborations provide added credibility to programs by offering information, messaging, and resources that remain constant across a variety of sources with differing goals and motivations. I'd also be remiss as a public health professional if I didn't mention cross-departmental, cross-agency, and even cross-sector collaborations. Public health and education, as you guys probably know, are inextricably linked and are strong foundations in both, are strong foundations for success later in life. You should also consider how to work with your health department and other departments like transportation, parks and recreation, and even housing and urban development. I've seen people or departments convene advisory groups or simply keep in touch via email to the communications counterpart each month just to be able to say, hey, this is what's going on, or even to create more collaborative opportunities. You also want to keep in mind that adding more partners will not necessarily result in more awareness. So a sound partnership strategy, it ensures that all partners add value and that your department keeps partners engaged as active participants. And I'd like to stress active participants because a lot of times we tend to create plans and they sit on a shelf. And so one of the things that you'll want to do is to really flesh out the partnerships section of your plan and determine who can be the most helpful to you and mutually beneficial, I should say. But examples of how to engage partners might include reaching partners through customer, constituents, and employees, through these speaking opportunities and partner events, outreach to partner employees through internal channels, direct or company-wide blogs or newsletters rather, partners, promotional channels such as social media, websites, and blogs. You also could consider inviting partners to participate in program efforts to further their reach in joint promotion or community events. And then fostering joint partner opportunities with your department, such as co-branding of materials, co-branding of community events, co-written blog posts or op-ed pieces, and then cross-promoting applicable social media messages, which again, Elizabeth will talk about shortly. I'd like to note too that prior to engaging any partners, you should conduct outreach through a series of recruitment activities to build the number of partners in the program. And again, these activities might include web marketing and social networking. And a lot of this stuff can be done informally if you don't have the budget for a quote unquote partnership development plan. So finally, your digital content strategy is also important to consider in your communications plan. The week before last, my colleague Josh DeLong spoke to a digital content strategy and its components. And so I know all of these webinars are going to be recorded and they'll be online, and I know Mel will share a link to these in case you missed the digital portion, but I did want to mention that as a reference. So I'll end by reminding you that Mel's group here will be providing that communications plan template at some point. We're working on it now. And again, I know that, during, today's fast-paced kind of COVID-19 world, having a solid plan is critical to your success, but we may also forget because a lot of our worlds are converging, whether it be work, personal, professional. So I know sometimes planning takes a back seat to crises, but that's okay. Just recognize it and try to plan as much as you can. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Mel.
Thanks so much, Brian. And thank you so much for the reminder that this approach is really scalable, right? It's you can take the steps that are accessible to you now to start building your plan. Brian just shared some really great overarching concepts to share with your communications plan and strengthening communications. And he really set us up well to start diving in a little bit deeper to some of the components of that plan and how those components can be applied during a time of crisis or an emergency. So thanks again also to all of you for bearing with us through technical issues, I think both on our end and your end. As we all know, working from home and with kids back in school, we're all battling for bandwidth these days. So thanks for your patience, and I appreciate you sticking with us. And on that note, we're going to move on to some discussion around crisis communication. And for that, I am going to introduce Jeff Gibbons, who has 24 years of experience in communications and delivers strategic media counsel and support for ICF Next Media Relations Practice. He provides media training and issues crisis communication support for the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institute of Health, and Christiana Care Health System. Just before joining ICF, Jeff was the vice president at News Generation, an earned media relations firm. Additionally, Jeff spent 16 years working in broadcasting as an anchor, which you'll probably hear in his voice when he presents, and a writer and producer for various media companies, including ABC, CBS, iHeartMedia, SiriusXM, and Westwood One. So, Jeff, we're going to hand it over to you now.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mel. I appreciate it. So when we're talking about a crisis, a couple of things we want to be able to think about. What's the difference between a crisis and what's the difference between an issue? So an issue is when one person in your office tests positive for COVID, and a crisis is when 50 people in your office test positive for COVID. So today we're going to be talking more about on the crisis side of it. So a crisis often happens suddenly and unexpectedly, and it'll require a quick response, just thinking about COVID. So it also needs to be managed correctly. It can result in the loss of trust for your agency, also job loss within your organization, decreased morale among your staff, which can really lead to problems, public reputation damage, and increased stakeholder confusion and missed opportunities that you can use to support providers and families. So there's no way to plan for every event, but a well-managed crisis comms plan can really help you avoid all of these things and really provide critical support for your stakeholders during a time of crisis. So a crisis comms plan is not meant to be developed and then forgotten. Now that happens a lot of times, but you really need to require a dedicated team to be able to review and update them on a regular schedule. That way, if new issues arise, this dedicated team can actually work to help guide future decisions. And since most of us are now working virtually or remotely, it's a really smart idea to move your plan onto a digital platform in order to really effectively manage an issue or situation. So there's 5 principles to crisis management. So on the left-hand side here, you're going to see the area for culture. So the team working on your crisis needs to work with authenticity and transparency. If your organization doesn't have this in their culture, it's going to be very difficult to manage the crisis. And then on the right-hand side, you have the execution of the plan. So that takes speed, agility, and creativity. You already need to have a plan in place. You need to have the right team members, and you need to be nimble and alert so that you can really react to what can happen. So now we're going to get into crisis communications planning. This can really be broken down into 6 elements, and we'll go through them here. First is a detailed plan. This is how you're going to respond, communicate, and manage the crisis. Second is the crisis communication team. This team should already be ready to go at a moment's notice. These are the folks that are responsible for making important decisions like collecting information, creating and disseminating key messages, communicating with leadership, and working with the media. And going back to what my colleague Brian said earlier about messages, these messages really have to be in plain language and should really be understood the first time they're heard or read. Number 3 is key messages and holding statements. Make sure you're considering all the possibilities in your organization could face and making sure that those key messages and statements can be used in the response. So there's no way to plan for everything. I'm not sure anyone could have predicted COVID, but you can definitely work to plan the best that you can for any crises that may come up with your organization. Number 4 is internal comms procedures. This is how leadership is going to be consulted and then make decisions on how employees are going to be receiving those key messages. Number 5 is contacts and media lists. The last thing you want to be able to do is have to look up who you need to contact in the media during a crisis. This is something that should be researched and updated and be ready to go also at a moment's notice. Number 6 is appendices. These can include guidelines, checklists, and forms that can help support and facilitate your crisis communications. Next, we'll see your decision tree, right? So there's a decision tree here. These next 2 slides are an example of a decision tree that ICF developed for the National Cancer Institute. A little bit small to see here, but you'll be able to see them when we share the deck. The tree is really a great idea, and it's used to visualize the decision-making process by mapping out the different courses of action and their potential outcomes. So it's really important to make sure that you're doing 2 things. You're making sure that you're including the right questions and that you're able to figure out what those decisions are so that when a crisis does arise, you'll be able to use this map and this tree to be able to make sure you're making the right decisions. All right, so now we're going to get into crisis management, the 7 steps for crisis management. First, you want to make sure you verify the issue or the crisis situation. You need to find out the facts of exactly what is going on and then determine whether or not it's an issue or a crisis. Number 2 is to clarify notification and assignments. These should already be set up in your crisis communications plan, and then they should be ready to go once you verify the situation. Number 3 is to assess the communication crisis level. This is the perfect place for you to use your decision tree. Number 4 is using a communication management process. This is where you're going to determine if, when, and how you communicate with your staff, stakeholders, and the general public, as well as the media. Number 5, develop messages. As I mentioned in the communications planning portion, it's really important to consider all the possible crises that your organization could face, and also making sure that you have those key messages ready to be used in the response. Number 6, ensure timely approval and message release. Time is really of the essence, so you really need to make sure that you're moving swiftly and accurately with your message approval and your distribution. Number 7 is to monitor and mitigate. As part of your plan, you should have members of your team monitoring social media, the general media, and your own website to determine if there are any issues that might arise during the crisis so you can make sure that you address them in a timely manner. All right, so let's get into using your website during a crisis. So websites are a go-to resource for information in times of crises, not only for the media, but also for families, providers, stakeholders, and the community at large. In just a few minutes, my colleague Elizabeth will be discussing using social media in this effort as well. Your communications and your consumer education website should be updated quickly, and it should serve as a source of truth and be a forum to share steps that need to be taken to address or correct the situation. It's also important to really work with your organization's IT department to make sure that the appropriate crisis communication team member can access and update the website from locations outside of your building, basically because we're all basically working from home, right? So you want to make sure you have access to that information at any time. All right, next we want to talk about ways to leverage your website during a crisis. You would definitely want to make sure that you're working with website managers on the best road to take for your individual websites. But some really good options are displaying an alert bar, adding a homepage announcement, making blog or post statements, running a pop-up window on your website, updating your press room and your media kit. And you can also publish a resource landing page as well. Also want to remember that the consumer education website is really the go-to source for all childcare information, especially the spotlight on emergency preparedness, response, and that's just a really great place. There's a recovery content suite there. It includes all the resources you need to support families, childcare providers, planning for and responding to and recovering from emergencies and disasters. So just make sure you go to that website. That really is kind of the catch-all for all the information that you need there. All right, and with that, I will throw it back to Mel.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I think crisis communications is a topic that, obviously is on a lot of your minds today. I know it's hard, and it can be hard to kind of build the ship as you're sailing it, especially if you're juggling multiple events at once. So if your agency is still in the thick of crisis response, now is a good time to think about how you're capturing your thoughts on what's working and what's not working, and kind of adjust some small elements as you can. So the resource suite that Jeff just shared with us is the Spotlight on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery. Amy just dropped that link in the chat. That has some really great resources to help you think about how you posture your consumer education website to support communications during a crisis. And there's actually an assessment tool that helps you think about how you used your website during an emergency, and has some really great questions to help you think about how you might improve that moving forward. So I would definitely encourage you to check out that suite and really look at that assessment tool as well. So we also recognize that it's important to understand where you have influence over your communications plan. So you may be embedded within a larger agency that has their own communications plan and staff that you don't have a ton of influence over. So, some of the recent events may have gotten you thinking about how you might strengthen those relationships with your communications folks and the folks that manage communication for your agency, or what areas of communications you specifically have control over. Remember that you can always pull people back to your consumer education website for childcare specific information. And one of the ways that you can do that is to support messaging and outreach through social media, which is going to be our next topic. So I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Jessup, who's going to talk to us a little bit about how social media can support your communications plan. Elizabeth is a social media specialist who specializes in using social media analytics to create evidence-based strategies for reaching key audiences through social media. She has developed social media strategies for numerous states and federal government agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Cancer Institute. So she has a lot of great information to share with us. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. Today I'll talk about social media and how you can use social media to promote your websites. So first we want to understand why we're using social media, especially in today's media environment, with Americans spending more time on social media than ever before. Social media is increasingly an essential tool for getting your website out there. A majority of US consumers report that social media influences their spending decisions, and consumers are more likely, again, than ever before to research products, research anything that they're spending money on online, and especially on social media. A great thing about social media, as opposed to other sort of traditional marketing outreach, social media allows you to reach your target audience where they already are. So when your social media audience finds your post or your product online, it's really easy for them to go right from that social media post to your website. So you're connecting with your audience where they already are. And just to kind of put that into context, after search engines, social media is actually the largest driver of website referrals. So if somebody's not searching for your website on Google, the next place they're most likely to see your website is from social media. I'll give a quick overview of the 4 kind of main social media platforms that you might be familiar with. I refer to those as kind of the big 4. There are obviously other smaller social media platforms, but in thinking about promoting your website to as many people, as many members of your potential audience as possible, this is what you're going to want to focus on. So first we have Facebook, which is the largest and most diverse potential audience is found on Facebook. It is kind of the original big social media platform. You have people of all ages from all areas, all socioeconomic levels found on Facebook. And people tend to use it mostly for staying connected to friends and family, but it is also a really valuable source of potential website referrals. Twitter is more fast-paced and time-sensitive than Facebook and then really any of the other platforms. It's focused on current events and news media. Announcements about your organization could be really successful there. And it's home to many kind of informal communities. So you might find, public health Twitter, which is an informal collection of people who are interested in public health, who kind of look at the same things. You might have parenting Twitter, which is a lot of parents who exchange ideas and things about what's going on in parenting and in their lives with their children. Twitter is highly responsive and reactive, and that really sets it apart from the other platforms. It's fast moving. You really have to stay engaged or things kind of can pass you by. Instagram is a photo and video sharing platform primarily. It has a younger audience than Facebook and Twitter, but increasingly older people are using Instagram. It's also kind of where the micro-influencer movement really took hold on social media. So that's where you'll see a lot of lifestyle influencers, parenting influencers, really influencers on all kinds of topics who post about products or things that they're interested in and have huge followings. So if you're thinking about influencers in any space, Instagram's really the place to start that. Again, it's also that it's owned by Facebook. So if you're considering any paid tactics, Instagram and Facebook can align really well since they're owned by the same people. And I'll be talking primarily about organic social media, or that social media that you're not paying for. But a lot of what I'll talk about throughout this can also be applied if you want to have a paid campaign. And then LinkedIn, you're probably familiar, is more professionally focused, primarily used for networking, recruitment, and thought leadership. So thought leadership is a really great way to kind of promote your website on LinkedIn, or if you want to reach out to other professionals who may be involved in the topics you're posting about. LinkedIn is a really good place to do that. So here are just some quick tips for effective social content. Kind of if you're starting your social media from scratch, here are some things to think about when you're starting out. These really apply kind of across all of the platforms and apply also for paid and organic social media. So the first thing that I really want to emphasize is that social media is called social media for a reason. It's social, it's interactive, it's really important to engage with other users and your audience. It's not a blog, it's not something where you're just sending out a press release or sending out information that you want to. That is valuable, that is part of social media, but what really sets it apart is that it's an opportunity to engage with other users and to engage directly with your audience. So that might be replying to comments on your posts or liking or sharing other organizations' posts. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the partnership activity section. Another thing about social media is that it is fast moving. Twitter especially, but all of them are pretty fast moving. So it's important to post regularly and try to avoid long periods of inactivity. That's especially important because on social media, you have to rely on the platform's algorithms. So those are the sort of the things within the social media platform that determines how many people see your content and who sees it. So it's not like every single one of your followers is going to see every single one of your posts. Your social media platform will start by showing your post to a smaller group of people. And if it's successful with that smaller group of people, more people will see it and kind of so on and so forth. And one thing that the social media platforms take into consideration when considering how many people they want to show your post to is if you post regularly. And posting more regularly encourages the platform to show your post to more people. Another thing to think about is using plain language. We spoke about that earlier in this presentation, and it's equally important on social media. You do have, your messages need to be shorter, so that is one constraint on the language you can use in your messages. We talked about how sometimes plain language is actually longer, And on social media, you do want to keep your messages short, but you want to keep them really clear. You want people to see them and interpret them quickly because they're probably scrolling through a bunch of messages, and your message needs to be easily understood on that first kind of view. That's also why it's really important to include a clear, direct call to action. You want your audience to see your post and know exactly what you want them to do from that post. So whether that's visit this website or like this post, comment on this post, share this post, you want that call to action to be clear. Using trending hashtags and campaign-specific hashtags can also boost the reach of your posts and make sure that your posts are seen by more people, and also improve brand awareness of your organization. It's also important to include visuals, so images, photos, GIFs, videos, and links whenever possible. Links and visual elements are two things that the social media algorithms also favor in considering how many people show your content to. And then just to make sure that you're using your social media platforms as successfully as possible, make sure you monitor your account performance and use analytics to optimize your tactics. There are many, many places online that you can find sort of guidelines for using social media analytics, depending on what you're trying to do. And it's great to just use the native built-in analytics on the social platforms when you're starting out and just see what posts are performing really well. And then think about how you can incorporate those high-performing elements into other posts going forward. So now partnerships on social media, really important, like I said, for interacting with other social media users to maximize your reach and continue to grow your audience. When you're considering who you might want to sort of partner with on social media, there are a few criteria I've outlined here that you should think about. So the first thing is their existing social media footprint. Does that other account that you're considering interacting with, do they post regularly? Do they have a large engaged follower base? Because if they have a large follower base and you're interacting with them, those are more people for your content to then reach. Whereas if you're engaging with someone with a really small social media platform, you're probably not going to get as much, bang for your buck, so to speak. You also really want to think about the credibility of that other account. Is that account verified, which means the social media platform has kind of given them the stamp of approval, like they are who they say they are. That's not a make or break necessarily, but it is a good thing to look for. And if they aren't verified, can you sort of independently confirm their legitimacy? Is there a contact in that organization that you can reach out to off of social media and say, hey, just want to make sure this is the right social media account to be interacting with? And then you should also kind of scan through their posts and make sure their posts are just factually accurate. You don't want to be partnering with someone who's spreading disinformation, obviously. And that kind of also speaks to this third criteria, which is content alignment. You should look back through their recent posts and make sure that those posts align with your values, your audience, and your objectives. If you're trying to reach more parents, say, and the account that you're thinking about partnering with is really focused on students or on scientists or something like that, they might not have the exact right content alignment to be partnering with. So just consider that from kind of a strategic point of view. There's a variety of activities on social media that kind of fall under this umbrella of partnership activities. And you can really sort of engage in partnership activities regardless of the amount of time you have to commit. So there are some really low effort partnership activities on social media, things like tagging an account in a social media post or engaging with posts from other accounts. So it's really easy to just see an account like, this is an organization we partner with, they just posted something about our website, we'll give that post a like, or we'll retweet that post. Or we're posting about this event we're hosting, and we're going to just tag an organization that we think is interested or an organization that is attending that event in the post just to kind of get that interaction going. Medium effort partnership activities could be things like participating in a Twitter chat. So that would be a Twitter chat that somebody else hosts, and you just are part of it and you answer questions, or posting content from a partner toolkit. If you have another maybe organization that you work really closely with who is having an observance or something, and they have a partnership toolkit to share social media content, and you post a post from that partner toolkit. It doesn't require a ton of effort on your part, but it's a little bit more than just liking a post. And then some higher effort activities would be things like actually creating a partner toolkit for other organizations to use, or organizing your own Twitter chat for other organizations to participate in. And there are many other ways to partner with other organizations on social media, but this is just kind of gives you a snapshot of some of the low, medium, and high effort activities. So partner toolkits, just want to go into that a little bit more. Partnership toolkits are really great ways to encourage your partners to share key content that is consistent and accurate. So organizations that want to share your website or want to share kind of things that you're doing, you want to make sure that they're prepared to share that content in a way that is consistent with what you're saying and with your brand, and also accurate. And when you provide them with social content, you can ensure that the messaging kind of stays in the right lane. Partner toolkits are especially useful for social media campaigns if you're hosting your own campaign and want to encourage other organizations to get involved and amplify your messages. And also for important observances. If you have a holiday or an awareness month coming up that's important to your organization, you can create a partner toolkit to kind of maximize the social media buzz that you can generate. Partner toolkits provide everything a partner would need to promote content. So that's everything from the post content, the text to the post, any accompanying graphics. Recommendations of when to publish are great, just to take a little bit of the work off of the partner. And then a mock-up of the published content is really helpful too, just to kind of show them what it should look like when it's ready to go. This is especially helpful if you're encouraging them to include links or hashtags or tagging other accounts, because if they just copy and paste, things may not sort of work on social media if you're just copying and pasting. So if you show a mock-up of what the content should look like, it's easy for them to check what their content looks like and just check that against what your mock-up looks like to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be. So now I want to speak a little bit about crisis communications on social media, just to kind of build off of what Jeff spoke about with crisis communications on your website. So it's important to create a crisis communications plan for social media before you need it. That's just kind of a good rule across the board. If you're having a crisis communications plan, you want to have that ready before you're in the middle of the crisis. And here are just kind of a list of things that are important to consider when you're creating that crisis communications plan. This will look different for every organization and even for different kinds of crises that you're anticipating. But these are things that you definitely want to touch on. So the first is guidelines for pausing and resuming social media activities. So that's criteria for when you need to pause your social media activity completely, or when you need to, sort of pause certain types of social media activities. So you want to have guidelines for pausing them, but you also want to have guidelines for resuming social media. So when, what kind of things or timing will let us know that it's okay to start social media again. And that includes recalling scheduled posts. So if you're scheduling posts either natively on Facebook or Twitter, or if you're using a tool like Hootsuite or something like that, make sure that you kind of list out everywhere that you may have posts scheduled to make sure that none of them slip through the cracks. The chain of command, also important to lay out. So you want to make sure you have somebody identified who's responsible for activating the crisis communications plan, and then for every step of that crisis communications plan, you want to make sure you know who is accountable for each part. It's also good to think ahead of time about canned messages you might want to use during anticipated crises. So for instance, if there's a public health crisis like the one we're experiencing now, you may want to think about canned messages that sort of say, refer to this organization, the State Department of Public Health, or of Health and Human Services, or something like that, just to make sure that you're ready to go with these canned messages that you can then adapt for the crisis at hand, assuming that it's a crisis that your organization is not directly responsible for. Then you also want guidelines for amplifying content from other accounts during a crisis. So this is similar to the canned messages. If there's a crisis that isn't sort of your responsibility, you want to kind of think through whose responsibility is it and how can we make sure we're amplifying the right information to our audiences to make sure people have what they need to get through this. And then the other part of a crisis communications in social media is how you can use social media to support a broader crisis communications plan. So this is more in the sense of if you have a crisis that your organization is directly responsible for handling, or a crisis that's affecting your organization directly. Think about how social media can support a broader crisis communications plan. So if you have a dedicated maybe website or web page for the crisis, make sure you're promoting links to those web resources in your posts on social media. Social media is often a place where people are going to find, the most up-to-date information, and so that is social media is therefore a great way to disseminate and highlight that most up-to-date information. As soon as something goes live on your website, you should post it on social media to reach as many people as possible. Also consider adding a pinned tweet or Facebook post. So that's a post that when somebody clicks on your profile on social media, they'll go to your profile page, and that post will stay at the top of your page, regardless of how long it's been since you posted it. And so that's great for highlighting a key piece of information related to the crisis, or highlighting, a key web resource for people to click to make sure that they're getting the information they need. And then it's also important to think about maintaining engagement with audiences on social media throughout the crisis. So even if you're pausing regular posting on social, or if you're kind of out of the regular cadence of your social media activities, it's really important that you keep engaged with your audience on social media. So that means keep monitoring your direct messages, respond to comments that are requesting information are really the two key parts. Because if people are reaching out to you on social media for information, you want to make sure you're there and you're ready to respond on social media to ensure that you're giving your audience the support they need as quickly and as effectively as possible. So now I'm going to hand it over to Mel to wrap up.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for sharing some of those really helpful tips for using social media, both in and out of crisis. I think, it's interesting to think about using and leveraging partnerships when you're working from the perspective of a state or a state agency or jurisdiction. So we do want to make sure that everyone is thinking about how those partner toolkits can be structured so that your partners aren't necessarily speaking 100% on your behalf, right? Those templates will help you outline what can and can't be shared outside of the agency, and really with the full intent of circling everyone back to your consumer education website, right? So getting your partners to share your posts, getting people to link back to your websites, really using social media as a tool to drive traffic to that primary consumer education website in your jurisdiction. And I think that a lot of the recommendations that Elizabeth shared can help you think about that. We also have a resource guide that the State Capacity Building Center has developed on social media usage. So we will drop that link in the chat. Oh, it's already there. Thank you very much, Amy. And hopefully you can take a look at that outside of this time and gain some more tips and tricks on social media. So with that, we are going to move on to website analytics, and Darren Goldberg is going to talk to us about that. Darren is a seasoned web analytics and strategic engagement expert with more than 15 years of experience analyzing on-site behavior data and translating data into insight to determine user behavior and trends that stimulate corporate action and improve the user experience. He demonstrates client service focus and an innate ability to translate business goals and key performance indicators into reporting requirements. And that's really fancy language for saying that Darren is really, really good at his job of using data to help you further quality improvement. He's been a huge help to our team, and I'm excited to have him share how you can use web analytics in the context of your consumer education website. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Darren.
Great. Thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. I'm Darren Goldberg. I'm going to talk to you today about the importance of analytics. And let's really be honest right from the beginning. Analytics today is overwhelming. There's a lot of different metrics to look at coming from many different sources. A lot of people think of analytics as reporting and telling you after the fact how things have done. While that is part of the story, it's more critical than ever to have analytics help craft your strategy from the beginning based on what the data actually tells you. We all want to make data-driven decisions, but you must make sure you're utilizing the right data to make smart business decisions. Usually, analytics gets brought into a lot of projects where our first question usually is, what's your goal and how do you measure success? It's important to know what success or a good site visit looks like to you. My advice would be to think outside the box. It may be something that you aren't sure is even trackable. It's really analytics' job to determine how we measure that and come up with the right solutions for you to get what you need. The important part of analytics is to tell you a story. It's not just explaining that something happened, which would be the what or an observation, but the cause of why that happened, which is, again, your why or your insight, and what do we do next with that information, which would be that recommendation. Leveraging data is critical in making smart business decisions. Brian, Jeff, and Elizabeth made some great suggestions regarding tactics you should do. Analytics is important to tell you what you implemented is effective and performing the way you're expecting. It's critical to determine those key success measures and making sure you're tracking them while aligning to those predetermined goals and optimize accordingly. You should want to know what your return on investment is for any sort of project. If you invested in a communications plan, social media outreach, a site redesign, or any web project, you should want to know what you're getting for your $5,000, $50,000, or even $500,000 spent. Analytics tries to inform as much as possible regarding the how and the now what. It's great to know that your outreach tactics are promoting your brand, but now what? You could have the best content around or a new report you want people to read and download. But if you don't promote, how do users find that? To this, there's what we call the complete digital story. There's two parts of that story. The first part is driving people to your digital properties. The second part is understanding once they get there, what do they do? To understand those desired effects, you need to make sure you track properly and attribute the entire picture within each stage of the digital experience, moving people from an awareness to consideration and finally an intent stage. However, for all the planning we do and where we want users to go, site visitors have their own happy path and their own agenda in mind. We want to be able to track as much as possible and leveraging these tactics to have a better understanding of user behavior during critical times. These are some examples of what we've done during this kind of COVID-19 scenario of what other clients have done to redo that. One is they've leveraged their outreach channels to promote more content and help improve engagement behavior. Another would be reviewing internal and external search terms to see trends in those keywords that could lead to possibly editing or adding new possible content. Thirdly, leveraging feedback tools, i.e. there might be examples of using polls or contact us forms. It's very important not to overlook this channel because it's critical to monitor what users are requesting, what opinions they have, and possible suggestions. Fourth is creating a centralized performance dashboard to track digital behavior. In this digital environment, monitoring as close to near real time as possible is critical to react accordingly to emerging trends. Understand that user behavior does not wait for monthly reports. And lastly, leverage your own site to conduct internal promotion. While we're pushing a lot of things there, your website is another channel to take advantage of. Here are some examples of what some current clients have done during this time. Here you see some screenshots of where they've used a banner at the top to highlight some additional COVID resources that maybe otherwise people don't see. Another couple examples is we've had a client who've added COVID-19 to their actual navigation bar. And a more common one you may see are people adding COVID-19 resources to a kind of a current topics or a what's new situation. All these on-site promotional tactics are great ideas. Make sure you leverage analytics in a way to be strategic in where you place these callouts. A common thought is that most people enter your website on your homepage, and that will be your hub to navigate them through everything they need to see. While the homepage can definitely be that portal, the truth is data tells us the homepage is not the top entry page on your website. The portal people use to navigate, ironically, is Google or your search engine to navigate to the specific content they are interested in. Analytics is important when using on-site promotion to not just include on your homepage, but strategically placed on key trafficked, non-promoted landing pages. If you're tracking using Google Analytics, you can add tracking parameters to your links. These are called UTMs, which stands for Urchin Tracking Modules. People ask me, why do we need to use something like this? I can get this kind of numbers from my social media or my email platforms. I can understand how many people click on that banner ad or the link in the email. And that is absolutely correct. The advantage of leveraging UTMs is not only do they track that initial click interaction, but then they track any subsequent activity. Say if you drove them to a page where you wanted them to download a file or watch a video. Attributing success based on what link they clicked on can be tied back leveraging UTMs and be able to say, oh, I realized these amount of users clicked on this link and then watched that video. That's the kind of powerful insights you can get from analytics. The example you see on the screen in front of you is an email I got from a company. And if you see, it's very small in this, but when you get the slide deck, you'll see the highlighted part in yellow are those actual UTMs. And yes, there are a few people out here who still use Yahoo Mail. What you see from what they're trying to accomplish in this example is similarly, they are using UTMs to track all these links behavior from their email platform. The advantage of what they get is understanding that not only if the goal of their conversion is they want you to purchase golf clubs, but you can tie it down to each link. So knowing, did the people who purchase new golf clubs, or are they looking at the used links? By tagging each specific link can really help, is very helpful in optimizing these email channels for conversion. The important thing to note is you should really use campaign URLs when your promotional tactics are pointing back to your site, and your site also has Google Analytics. There really is no need, if you're promoting content that is pushing traffic to a different website that is not part of your property, that you're not tracking, to add those kind of UTMs. Here are examples you could see here by certain channels that we would leverage, that any kind of outreach promotion that would want to have UTMs, as something as simple as banner ads, social media posts, email marketing, paid Google search ads. And one that gets a lot of good questions we get is on print ads, especially since people are like, well, that's a print. How on earth are we tracking that? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you. What we use is a tactic called a vanity URL. And you might see these, and you probably may not have known these were actually vanity URLs. If you've ever driven by and seen a billboard or an ad in a newspaper, a magazine, a common thing you might want to do is in a conference, you have maybe a handout, a pamphlet. There's a shortened URL, and that shortened URL is for what is easy for somebody to remember. What will then happen is you will have to get a technical resource to kind of help you with this, but it's simple enough to basically say, you just want to have them set up a 301 redirect, and what will happen is the redirect will show the longer URL with the parameters associated with this. The reason why you want to do this is attribute success to any kind of promotion you're doing to the proper channels to understand the influence these channels have. I want to thank everyone today for your time, and hopefully you've learned something new about how to leverage analytics. And with that, I will hand it back to Mel to wrap things up.
Hey, thanks so much, Darren. And I learn something new from you every time we have you on a call or you join our team. I think one thing to keep in mind, and Darren hit on this a little bit, is that when you're looking at data and analytics, if you are in a state leadership position or you're maybe the state administrator for an agency, you're not expected to know all of these technical components, right? It's definitely important to leverage your IT teams, your communication teams, work on building relationships with your partner agencies that may be using some of these more advanced analytic tools and learn from them. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to be the expert on everything. And then we also have quite a few resources that are available to help you think about Google Analytics and helping embed that in your consumer education website and any communications that are outward facing. And so Amy will drop that link in the chat. And that resource guide is really meant to give you a higher understanding of analytics, but then also help kind of connect between your agency and the folks that may be able to support you in improving your analytics. So I really appreciate it, Darren. Thanks for sharing. Next, we are going to move over resources designed to help you strengthen your communications plans and your consumer education website. And so with that, I want to first highlight childcare.gov. And you may have heard us talk about childcare.gov a lot recently on some of our webinars, but it's a really valuable resource, and I always want to take the chance to highlight it when we have the opportunity. Childcare.gov is the national consumer education website that's funded by the CCDBG Act and supported by the Office of Child Care to ensure that families and the general public have access to transparent information about child care choices available to them. As the national child care consumer education website, childcare.gov is the trusted source for families to learn about federal and state care resources. So how does that help families? It helps families connect directly to resources that help them learn about their childcare options, make more informed childcare choices, engage in the development of their child, and learn about the full array of resources and supports that are available to them in their state and territory. So under the See Your State's resources section of childcare.gov, they provide links to resources for each state and territory across the following categories. We've got understanding and finding childcare, such as the jurisdiction's childcare search, consumer education website, CCR&R site, licensing information, criminal background check information, and much more. There's also information on financial assistance for families, such as WIC, TANF, SNAP, CHIP, and energy assistance. There's health and social services information, such as child support, child protective services, early intervention, and then also child development and early learning, such as Head Start, special education, developmental screening, child development information, and parent support. So, but I think it's also important to think about how childcare.gov sites can help you in a leadership role in your state. And one point is that it can help you learn from other jurisdictions. So you can use childcare.gov to peruse how other jurisdictions have approached key components in their consumer education website, including design features and content elements. You may be able to identify elements that work well in your jurisdiction and incorporate them into planning continuous improvement for your own consumer education website. You can also access your own jurisdiction's resources more readily. You can use childcare.gov to easily access your own jurisdiction's resources that pertain to children and families in one place. Your state's resources page not only directs links to your jurisdiction's childcare related resources, but it also links to family financial assistance programs and a lot of other resources. And it's just all there at your fingertips. So it's a really good resource to bookmark. And then just one more piece on childcare.gov. To respond to the urgent need for up-to-date childcare-related information during COVID-19 pandemic, childcare.gov launched a new dedicated COVID-19 resources and information webpage. As I say new, it was actually launched in April. So the resource page provides links to an array of COVID-19 response and recovery resources for each state and territory to help families access childcare information that they need to make informed childcare choices during the crisis. So that's also a good place that you can go and look to see how jurisdictions are responding to this crisis and using their consumer education websites and their communications plans to respond to COVID-19. And then I'm also just going to share a couple of other consumer education resources. These are links that we've already shared mostly in the chat, but so I'll run through them quickly and then this will be shared out in the slide deck. But the Office of Child Care Consumer Education Resources landing page is a really rich source of resources, both from the State Capacity Building Center and other national partners. So it's a really good place to go just for any information that you need around your consumer education website. And then you can also find additional resources at the Office of Child Care website, and the link is there on the screen. This is the page that has our most current resources from consumer education. So these are our featured resources. They're not all of our resources, but they are, organized into different buckets. So you'll see at the top, that piece that says Consumer Education Website Continuous Quality Improvement is our current series. So it features both of our most recent webinars as well as the resources and tools that support that. And that's also where this webinar will be posted once it's remediated and ready for viewing. And then you can also find a lot of our other resources in that page, some of the resource guides from last year and the webinars that supported those, as well as a lot of other featured content. These are some of the guides that we have built. These were all released last year. And so we've got guides that Amy's already shared some of the links to. So branding your consumer education website, designing websites that are accessible for all families. So that resource guide covers a lot of topics that or points that Brian hit on his early plan. Or his earlier presentation. And then increasing search engine optimization. This is a really good companion guide to some of the things that Darren hit on. So it's how to use, how to set up your website so that it can be easily found by parents, families, providers, and anyone that you want to reach. We also have the guide to measuring web traffic and engagement. So if you want to know more about analytics, I would say these top two guides would be a really good place to start. And then the social media strategies guide that talks a lot about what Elizabeth alluded to in her topic. This is our entire SCBC Consumer Education webinar series from last year. So you can see kind of what we've been up to over the past few years. And we encourage you to check out all of those at the link that is on that page. And this is our current webinar series that I think we've already touched on for the most part. So we are very, very excited that you joined us today. And I do want to give a huge thanks to all of our presenters and to you for sticking with us. I would like to learn a bit more from you before you leave, a little bit about how much your understanding of this topic, which is communications strategies during crisis and outside of crisis, how much has this improved as a result of this webinar? So if you could just take a quick moment and respond to the poll. And I'm going to give you a little bit of time on each of these before I move to the next one. We really do like to hear your feedback on these polls because it helps us to think about how we can improve our presentations for the next go round. All right, looks like folks are still responding, so I'll give it just a little bit more time. Thank you so much for your feedback. All right, now I'll move on to the next one. How likely do you think you'll use these strategies in your future work with consumer education websites? We're hoping that what you heard today, you've found some ways and some strategies to apply these to your own work. And again, remembering, I'll always come back and plug incremental approaches, baby steps, right? So you may not have the ability or the decision authority or whatever to apply everything that you learned today, but we're hoping that it really got the gears spinning on some of the things that you may be able to change, or some conversations or communications that you can have to move forward your communications planning and leveraging your consumer education websites. All right, it looks like our responses is slowed on that one. So just one more question that I can pick your brain, and we'll use the chat for this one. Are there any other topics that would be useful to you? So as we think about moving forward for future webinars and trying to meet the needs of our jurisdictions, we would love to hear what you still need support in, or if we need to elaborate on anything moving forward that you heard today. So where do you want support? Where do you need support? Just use the chat box to respond to that. And I'm going to leave that open for just a little bit. Again, I'll give you time to respond to the chat before we close out this presentation. But thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thanks to all of our presenters on the call today, to Brian and to Darren and to Jeff and Elizabeth, for sharing their knowledge. We really appreciate hearing from you. And thanks to all the folks behind the scenes, like Caroline, that were helping us, and Amy and Karen, that were helping us keep this presentation moving. I'm seeing there are some good suggestions in the chat box on things that you'd like to hear more about. And Laura will definitely reach back out to you in regards to your question. Specific design elements for a successful web page. Yeah, that's great. I think that could be a really good place to focus. And we do have some resources that speak to that. And I think in our resource bank, and we also have some more resources that will be released shortly, some things that we're working on that will speak a little bit to some design elements. And we're excited to share those when they're available. And yes, we will definitely send out resources afterwards. So there'll be a follow-up email to all of the registrants from this webinar. So those who attended and didn't attend, where there will be a recording of the webinar, and we'll also share the resources that were shared in today's call. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us. And I wish you all a good day, and hope that you all stay healthy and well. And we hope to hear from you again soon. We hope you join us for some future webinars.